Ever felt like you're not good enough, not rich enough, for the person you truly want? You pour your heart out, you dream of a future, and then they just laugh. Not a gentle chuckle, but a dismissive, soul-crushing laugh that tells you exactly where you stand in their world. It's like hitting an invisible wall, isn't it? A wall made not of stone, but of status. Of expectations you didn't even know were there. You spend nights replaying the scene, wondering what you could have done differently. Did you say the wrong thing? Were your clothes not quite right? Or was it something deeper? Something about your bank account balance that screamed unworthy? Because for Mark, it wasn't a maybe. It was a no, followed by a sting that would last for years. Imagine finally gathering the courage. You've been crushing on her, the vibrant, ambitious Maya, for what feels like forever. You see her, really see her. Beyond the surface, you picture a life, small and cozy, but full of genuine connection. You're ready to lay it all on the line. You practice your words 100 times in your head, smoothing out every tremor of doubt. But when you finally speak, her response isn't confusion or even gentle refusal. It's pure, unadulterated dismissal. "Mark," she'd said, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical pity. "You're sweet, really. But you and I, we live in different universes." And then came the laugh, a laugh that cut deeper than any insult, because it wasn't just at him. It was at the idea of him ever being enough. A laugh that told him his dreams were pathetic. And you know that feeling, don't you? That gut punch of being told your love isn't just unwanted, but ridiculous. It wasn't just about money, but about the future she envisioned. A future he clearly wasn't a part of. A future that glittered with luxury, while his offered honest hard work. She couldn't see past the current struggle, the hand-to-mouth existence of a budding entrepreneur. She saw only the poor and the unworthy. But here's the twist you won't expect. 7 years later, that laughter came back to haunt her in a way she never imagined. A regret so sharp it made her entire perfect world crumble. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about rejection. It's about a silent revenge that completely changes everything you think you know about success and true love. You know, that cold, empty silence that follows a humiliation. That's where Mark lived for months. Maya's laughter didn't just stay in that coffee shop. It followed him into his cramped studio apartment. It sat with him at his desk while he worked his third-shift job. Every time he looked at his bank statement, he didn't see numbers. He heard her voice telling him he belonged in a different universe. But here's the thing about being laughed at. Either breaks you or it becomes the highest octane fuel you've ever tasted. You've been there, right? That moment where you stop crying and start calculating. Mark realized that Maya hadn't just rejected him. She had audited his entire existence and found it lacking value. So, he decided to change the currency. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped looking at the photos of her with guys who owned the right watches and drove the right cars. He realized that while she was chasing the already successful, he had the chance to build success from the atoms up. He started spending 16 hours a day teaching himself the one thing the elite couldn't just inherit: the architecture of the digital universe she bragged about was leaking air. You see, the funny thing about status is that it's expensive to maintain. Maya had spent 7 years building a life that was essentially a high-end stage play, but the theater was being sold. Julian had gambled their lifestyle on high-risk tech ventures, and he had lost, but he hadn't just lost to the market. He had lost to a specific competitor who seemed to know his every move before he made it. Imagine being Maya, sitting in your marble kitchen, realizing that your husband isn't just stressed, he's terrified. He tells you that a firm called Apex Legacy has bought out their mortgage, their car leases, and even the debt on Julian's family business. They didn't just buy the debt to collect interest. They bought it to foreclose. Who is Apex? She asks. Julian doesn't know. Nobody knows. The CEO is a shadow who operates through 3 layers of shell companies. But while Maya is panicking about her guest list for the next gala, you, the viewer, the mark in this story, are sitting in a glass office 300 miles away. You aren't laughing. You aren't even angry anymore. You're just precise. You realize that the person you once loved is now just a distressed asset on your balance sheet. It's a strange kind of power, isn't it? To realize that the person who once made you feel like nothing is now entirely dependent on your mercy, and she doesn't even know it's you. But then the final blow comes. A formal invitation is sent to Maya and Julian, not to a gala, but to a mandatory restructuring meeting at the Apex headquarters. Maya decides to go, thinking she can use her charm, her status, her universe to win over this mysterious CEO. She puts on her most expensive dress, the one that screams old money. She's ready to look down on the person across the table. She has no idea that when those double doors open, the first thing she hears isn't a greeting. It'll be the silence of 7 years, finally breaking. You know that feeling of walking into a room and knowing you're about to lose everything, but you still try to keep your head high. Maya walked into the Apex boardroom with her universe mask on. She was ready to negotiate, to flirt, to demand whatever it took to save her house. She saw a man standing with his back to her, looking out at the city skyline. He looked powerful, tailored, and expensive. He looked like the kind of man she always told herself she deserved. "Mr. CEO," she started, her voice practiced and melodic. "I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding our family's holdings." The man didn't turn around. He just stayed there, silent. The tension in the room was so thick, you could almost hear her heart racing. Then he spoke, not with a shout, but with a whisper that felt like a cold breeze. "It's not a misunderstanding, Maya. It's an audit." Maya froze. That voice, it didn't sound like a billionaire. It sounded like a ghost from a coffee shop 7 years ago. When Mark finally turned around, he wasn't the scruffy, hopeful boy she had laughed at. His eyes were hard. His posture was iron, and his suit cost more than her entire wedding. The shock didn't just hit her. It paralyzed her. You've seen that look before, haven't you? When someone realizes the person they treated like trash is now the person holding the bin. She tried to speak, but the laughter she used to have was gone. She looked at his hands, no longer stained with the ink of a struggling student, but clean and steady. "Mark," she whispered. "But how? You were inured. You didn't have, I didn't have, a universe." Mark finished for her. He walked toward the table and tossed a single thin folder in front of her. "You were right, Maya. We did live in different universes. Mine was built on work. Yours was built on credit. And today, your credit has expired." He didn't look at her with hate. That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? When someone doesn't even care enough to hate you anymore. He looked at her like a line item on a spreadsheet. She realized in that moment that all her beauty, her status, and her rejection meant absolutely nothing in this room. She was staring at the man who owned her house, her cars, and her husband's future. And the worst part, she could feel herself wanting him not for who he was, but for the power he now held. And that realization made her feel sicker than the debt ever could. You know that moment in a movie where the villain realizes they've been outplayed since scene 1? Maya wasn't a villain. She was just shallow. But in this room, shallow felt like a death sentence. She looked down at the folder Mark had tossed. It wasn't just bank statements. It was a timeline. A timeline of every universe she had tried to inhabit while he was building his own. "Mark, please," she stammered. She reached out to touch the table, her hand trembling. "We were kids. I didn't mean to. I was just being realistic." Realistic? Mark leaned back in his chair. He didn't look at her. He looked at the city he now partially owned. "You weren't being realistic, Maya. You were being a consumer. You looked at me and saw a product with a low current value, so you traded up. That's business. I respect business. That's why I bought your life. It was a bargain. Imagine the sting of that. To be told your entire personality, your marriage, and your social standing were just a bargain for someone else to acquire." He wasn't even angry. "That's what's killing you as you watch this, right? The coldness. You want him to scream at her, to give her some emotion to work with. But he gives her nothing. He gives her a mirror." "Julian is a good man," she whispered, trying to find a shred of dignity. "Julian is a leveraged man," Mark corrected. "He spent 7 years buying your affection with money he didn't earn. And now the bill is on my desk." "I'm not here to talk about your love life, Maya. I don't care about your love life. I'm here to discuss the foreclosure on the estate." She realized then that the love she had laughed at 7 years ago was the only thing in her life that had ever been offered for free. Everything since then had been a transaction. Her husband's attention, her friends' invitations, her very identity. It all had a price tag, and Mark was the only one who knew the exact number. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Do you want me to apologize? Do you want me to tell you I made a mistake? Fine. I regret it. I regret every word I said in that coffee shop. Is that enough?" Mark finally looked her in the eye. A small, sad smile touched his lips. 7 years ago, that would have been everything. Today, it's just noise. Regret doesn't pay the interest on a $10 million default, Maya. So, here's the deal. You have 48 hours to vacate, or you can stay as a tenant. My company needs a brand ambassador for the new development. Someone who knows how to look expensive while being completely hollow. You're perfect for the role. He was offering her a job as a ghost in her own home. He was turning her into the very thing she once mocked him for being, an employee. And as she stood there, looking at the man she could have loved, she realized the different universe she once bragged about was now just a room she was being evicted from. Have you ever gotten exactly what you wanted, only to realize it feels like ash in your mouth? Mark stood at the window of his office and watched Maya walk toward her car. She didn't walk like a queen anymore. She walked like someone who was afraid the ground might open up and swallow her. He had won. The different universe was under his thumb. But as he watched her, he didn't feel the rush of adrenaline he'd expected. He felt tired. Meanwhile, Maya's drive home was the longest 20 minutes of her life. Every street lamp, every manicured lawn, every familiar gate felt like a taunt. She walked into her mansion, the one she'd sacrificed her soul to maintain, and it felt like a cold museum. Julian was in the study, surrounded by half-packed boxes and empty bottles. He didn't even look up. He didn't ask how the meeting went. He already knew. You ever realize that the people you surround yourself with when you're on top are the first ones to vanish when the floor drops? Maya's phone, which used to buzz every 30 seconds with invites and gossip, was silent. Her universe wasn't just collapsing. It was evaporating. She realized that without the money, she was invisible to the very people she'd spent 7 years trying to impress. She sat on the edge of her bed that now technically belonged to Mark's holding company. She remembered the way Mark used to look at her. It wasn't about the dress or the car. He had looked at her like she was the only light in a dark room, and she had blown that light out because it didn't come with a high enough yield. But then she saw something. On the nightstand, there was a small, dusty notebook. It was from 7 years ago, the early days, before the luxury took over. It was filled with her own sketches and dreams of being a designer. She realized she hadn't touched a pencil in years. She had been too busy being a brand. Is it possible to be grateful for your own destruction? For a split second, she felt a terrifying spark of relief. The mask was off. The debt was called. She had nothing left to lose. But then she remembered Mark's offer to stay as a brand ambassador, to be a living advertisement for the man she'd broken. Was it a chance at redemption? Or was it the ultimate humiliation? She picked up her phone. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call her mother. She dialed a number she hadn't used in nearly a decade. She wanted to see if the man behind the desk was still the boy from the coffee shop. Do you ever wonder if you've become the thing you once hated? Mark looked at the screen. Her name was there. A relic from a life he thought he'd deleted. Part of him wanted to let it ring until it died. He wanted her to feel that specific, agonizing silence of being ignored. But curiosity is a heavy thing, isn't it? He picked up Mark. Her voice was different. No melody, no pity. Just the sound of someone who had finally run out of air. I'm not calling to ask for the house, for the money. I want to know one thing. Mark stared at the silver-framed clock on his wall. You have 1 minute, Maya. Why the job offer? She asked. Was it just to watch me suffer? To see me walk through these halls, knowing you own the air I breathe? Or was there a tiny part of you that still remembered who we were? Think about that for a second. If you were marked, what would your answer be? Would you tell her it was pure malice? Or would you admit that even after 7 years of building an empire, you're still that guy in the coffee shop, hoping she'll finally see you? Mark didn't answer immediately. He realized that if he said yes, it was to hurt you. He would be letting her win. He would be admitting that she still had power over his emotions. But if he said no, he was lying to himself. I offered you the job because you're an expert at illusions, Maya, he said, his voice flat. And this new world I'm building needs a face that people believe in, even when there's nothing behind it. It wasn't about the past. It was about the utility. The silence on the other end was like a physical weight. Maya realized then that the most painful thing wasn't his anger, was his indifference. He had turned her into a tool. He had finally achieved the ultimate revenge. He had treated her exactly the way she had treated him 7 years ago, as a means to an end. But as he hung up the phone, Mark felt a sudden, sharp pang of regret. Not for her, but for himself. He looked at his hands, the silver scars of his work hand, realized he'd built a kingdom where no one was allowed to love him. He had become the system, and now he had to decide if he was going to keep the foreclosure active, or if he was going to do something that the old Mark would have done, something that doesn't make any financial sense at all. Have you ever held the power to delete someone's existence with a single signature? Mark sat at his desk with the final eviction notice. All it needed was his initials. By morning, Maya and Julian would be on the street, and the universe she chose would be officially bankrupt. This was the moment he had worked for during those 1,000 nights of cold coffee and coding. This was the interest on her laughter. But something stopped him. He looked at the job offer he'd sent, Hertha brand ambassador role. It was a cruel joke, a way to keep her in a cage of his own making. But as he looked at her sketches in the folder, those old dusty dreams of hers, he realized something that should make you pause. When you spend your life trying to prove someone wrong, you're still letting them set the rules. Mark realized that by destroying her, he was still tied to her. He was still the boy in the coffee shop, just with a more expensive watch. He was rich, but he wasn't free, because freedom isn't owning your enemy. Freedom is no longer needing them to be your enemy. He picked up the phone again, not to call Maya, but to call his head of legal. The Apex restructuring, he said, his voice sounding more human than it had in years. Cancel the foreclosure on the residential estate. Transfer the deed. There was a long silence on the other end. Sir, that's a $12 million loss on the books. What's the justification? Write it off as an unrealized memory, Mark replied. He hung up. He didn't want to see her cry. He didn't want to see her thank him. He just wanted the debt to be gone, not because she deserved mercy, but because he deserved peace. Meanwhile, Maya was sitting in the dark of her empty living room. She was waiting for the knock, the official arrival of the end. But instead, she got an email, a simple one-sentence notification from a law firm. The debt was settled. The house was hers. No strings, no job offer, no contact. She should have been ecstatic. She should have been popping champagne. But as she stood in that massive, silent house, she felt a regret so heavy it physically hurt. She realized that Mark hadn't just given her a house. He had given her a mirror. He had shown her that he was the bigger person, the deeper soul, and the truer heart. He had outclassed her, not in money, but in character. And that is a debt you can never, ever pay back. You ever wonder if the poor version of you was actually the luckiest person in the room? 7 years after that laugh, Maya sat on a park bench. She still had the mansion, but it wasn't a universe anymore. It was just a building. She had tried to reach out to Mark to say something, anything, but he was gone. Not dead, just moved on. He had sold Apex Legacy and vanished into a new project, one that didn't involve shadow siphoning or debt. She realized then that the most expensive thing you can ever lose is someone's belief in you. Mark didn't want her regret. He didn't even want her apology. He had reached a level of success where her opinion was simply irrelevant. And that is the true sting of rejection, isn't it? Not being hated, but being inconsequential. She looked at her hands. They weren't dry like the villagers we talked about earlier, but they were empty. She had the life she thought she wanted, but she was haunted by the what if. What if she had seen the man instead of the bank account? What if she had invested in the soul instead of the status? And you're watching this right now because somewhere in your past or your present, there's a Maya. Someone who looked at your struggle and saw a limitation instead of a launch pad. Maybe you're the one working the double shifts right now. Maybe you're the one hearing the laughter in your head every time you try to build something new. Listen to me. That laughter isn't an insult. It's a prophecy. It's the sound of a system that is terrified of what you'll become when you finally stop asking for its permission. Mark didn't win because he got rich. He won because he stopped letting her universe define his value. But this story, it doesn't end with a house and a bank account. Because while Mark was walking away, he left something behind in that audit. A hidden file that Maya just found. A file that suggests the Alawos and the collectors from our other stories are much closer than she realized. The shadow siphon isn't just a metaphor. It's a real-time tracking of every heart that breaks for profit. Maya just opened the file, and what she saw in there, it changes everything about why she was told to reject Mark in the first place. It wasn't her choice. It was a calculation. Was Maya just a pawn in a much larger game of social engineering? And what is the second debt that Mark is currently trying to outrun in the ruins of the old city? If you want to see the moment Maya realizes her entire life was a scripted rejection, and if you want to know what happens when the poor man decides to audit the people who actually run the world, you know what to do. Comment part 2 right now. The algorithm only shows the truth to those who ask for it. Don't be like the Maya of 7 years ago. Don't look at the surface and miss the soul of the story. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me, what is the one thing you were told you were too poor to achieve? I'll see you in the next audit.